Alleluia, 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 Alleluia. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. When Jesus and his disciples arrived at Bethsaida, people brought to him a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. And putting spittle on his eyes, he laid his hands on the man and asked, "Do you see anything?" Looking up, the man replied, "I see people looking like trees and walking." Then he laid hands on the man's eyes a second time, and he saw clearly. His sight was restored, and he could see everything distinctly. And he sent him home and said, "Do not even go into the village." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
All right, so Bible trivia question for everybody this morning. We hear this morning about the story of Noah and about how he first sent out the raven and then he sent out a dove. Does anybody know the word for dove in Latin? The word for dove in Latin. All right, well, the word for dove is columba, right? Or columbus for a male, right? And so, or at least the masculine form of the word, right? I always just bring that up because, it's a part of our history, right? The man who discovered our continent, or is often credited with discovering our continent, right? His name was Cristobal Colon, right? But in Latin, people called him Christopher Columbus, right? That means the Christ-bearing dove. So they said this, and I've always just thought that was kind of interesting. How, here in the story of Noah, this dove brings hope, right, to the people in the ark. And likewise, Christopher Columbus, right, he brought the new faith, right? He brought the good news, right, to the new world. So I just think that's kind of an interesting side note from history. Right? Also, in this story of Noah, we know that God made a covenant, right, with Noah, and the sign of the covenant, of course, is the rainbow. And sometimes maybe people wonder, why the rainbow, right? In the Bible, it doesn't actually say the word rainbow, it just says the bow, right, and the clouds. And so in an ancient mindset, right, obviously one of the key weapons people would use in war, right, is the bow and arrow, right, and for hunting and etc. Right? So by God hanging up his bow, right, in the clouds, it means the bow is no longer directed at earth. Right? So it's a sign of his relenting of just punishment despite the sins of humanity. So just kind of an interesting image there. The last thing I think is significant for us to recognize about the story of Noah, right, is, again, just with that idea of God's wrath. Right? Sometimes people might read this story and think, that was pretty harsh of God to do something like that, wiping out basically the whole human race except for this one family. Right? And it's interesting when you read the story closely, the flood did not so much come as a product of God's wrath as much as a product of the natural consequences of the sins of humans who were on earth at the time. The story of Noah is not so much a story of judgment as much as it is a story of mercy. And what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is, as we heard in our first reading today from this story, it ends by God declaring the promises of the covenant. He says, as long as the earth lasts, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will not cease. So in other words, the seasons, the regularity of day and night, cold and heat, right? All of this is not a product of the beginning, but a product of this moment in salvation history. So remember last week when we were talking about the story of creation, and I was talking about how God brought the light from the darkness. He brought order out of the chaos. He brought the land from the midst of the abyss of the waters. And so what happened in the story is that the sins of human beings, it literally made the chaos start to return. The water started coming up from the ground. In other words, the world was created in such a way that the sins of human beings would affect the order of the cosmos. I hope this is making sense, right? It's kind of a different perspective on this story. So what God is saying here is that even though the natural course of things would be that chaos would return because of the sins of human beings, God is changing that in this moment. And no matter how sinful humanity might become, God is not going to allow the chaos, the flood, the darkness, all of that to return. This is one of the reasons why St. Paul in the New Testament, when he was preaching to the pagans in the Areopagus, he told them, one of the proofs for God's existence and for God's care for humanity is the very regularity of the seasons, the regularity of day and night. The fact that the cosmos has a regular order to it, because it didn't necessarily have to be that way. And it's only because God keeps it ordered that it happens. It's one of the things that as human beings we might take for granted, that the sun really will come up tomorrow. The summer really will return. It's a sign of God's fidelity to his promise.